Welcome to Shielded, the podcast dedicated to helping Florida's first responders understand the laws that affect their work and their lives. We bring clear answers, practical tips, and stories to help you when you need it most. If you're a first responder in Florida, this is your playbook. Be sure to check out all of our resources at bicklerlaw.com. I'm your host, Paolo Longo, and I'm here with my partner, Jeff Bickler. At Bickler & Longo, this is what we do. Now let's get into it. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our next edition of Shielded for First Responders. Today, we have a special guest. He is not only a client and a referral, but he is also a friend. Welcome to the show, Martin County Deputy Kenneth Youngblood. Thank you for being here, Mr. Youngblood, aka Tater. We'll say Tater. But again, we appreciate you coming on and talking a little bit about your story and your experience in the system. So thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Christine, since you're representing Mr. Youngblood and you've had a couple of go-arounds on this case, we'll let you start off and talking to Ken.
Yeah, so we've been through just about every possible scenario that you can go through in a workers' comp claim with Tater's case, and it started back in 2011, 2012. He had an issue with some tachycardia back then. Ended up settling that case with a different firm, and there was some wonky language in the settlement agreement that has kind of come back to haunt us every single time we've had a new claim for Tater. And so we fast forward to 2016, and he ends up in the hospital for AFib, and they denied that claim, saying that it was part of the original settlement from 2012. It was the same arrhythmia. So we had to prove that not only did he meet the elements of the heart bill for that claim, but we also had to prove that AFib was a different arrhythmia than the tachycardia. So we wanted to have Tater on to kind of talk about his experience in the system on the legal side of things and also on the medical side of things, just to kind of help anybody who may be a little bit nervous or reluctant to file a claim and go through the process and go through litigation, to show that there are success stories, and having a claim under the heart bill doesn't mean that you have to resign. It doesn't mean that you can't work anymore. Tater's still working. He's doing great. Despite all of the issues that we've had, he's still working and he's still good to go. So Tater, tell us, what was it like when you were in the hospital in 2016 for AFib after you had settled that case from 2011? What was that experience like in the hospital?
I mean, obviously the care I received was good. I knew about the Heart and Lung Bill Act, and so I did the notice of injury with my work, with my employer and everything, and sent it through for workman's comp. And when it got sent up to workman's comp, they immediately, I think it was within a week or a few days, they denied it, saying they weren't going to cover it. And that's when I reached out to you guys and explained what was going on, and you looked at all my stuff, and they're like, no, it definitely needs to be covered, because the previous case from 2011, 2012 was something completely different, a different diagnosis, as you call it. And I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I guess I got the street smarts, but I mean, I can read black and white, and it was two separate issues and two separate things. We ended up filing the paperwork with you guys and went through an entire process. Took about, I don't know, almost a year to deal with, I think. Maybe less than that, right around a year, going back and forth with depositions and statements and applying for benefits. And then we essentially ended up in a trial in front of a workman's comp judge up in St. Lucie County.
Yeah. So what we did to kind of start that process off was file the petition for benefits, and that's kind of like the workers' comp version of starting litigation. And they took your deposition. What do you remember from that? What was that experience like when they took your depo?
It's just like in anything we deal with on the law enforcement side. They try to get you caught up in this or caught up in that, and it wasn't there. It was just plain facts, basic, simple stuff. And there was, we weren't trying to pull anything over their eyes or try to hide anything or sneak anything in there. We were just stating the facts, and they didn't want to hear it.
Yeah, that's true. And then some point after that, we went to the court-ordered mediation, which everyone who files a petition in workers' comp is required to go to mediation, whether it's an open case or denied, like yours was at the time. What do you remember about the mediation experience? What was that process like for you?
It was pretty much the same kind of, not the questioning aspect of it, but the same thing of them basically trying to say, hey, we don't think you got anything here, and we're not going to really do much for you, basically.
Hmm.
That's when I decided, and we decided together, hey, this is something worth fighting for. We need to go ahead and go on through with this. And that's when we taking the next steps.
Yep, yep, and that's what we did, and what we did is we hired what's called an independent medical evaluator, which is, like, our hired gun, so to speak, our medical expert, and so our expert said, "Yes, these are 2 different arrhythmias. AFib is completely different from tachycardia," and then, of course, workers' comp got their own expert who said, "Well, no, they're related, they're the same thing," and so we had one doctor saying one thing, another doctor saying another, and our judge in that case appointed what's called an expert medical advisor, which is basically a tiebreaker doctor, right? The judge doesn't necessarily want to deal with all of the heavy medical stuff that's going on between these 2 doctors. So they throw another doctor into the mix to break that tie, so to speak. And that doctor was up in Jacksonville. What do you remember about having to go there for that evaluation and seeing that EMA doctor?
I had to go check your phone. I had to sorry about that. I got my little one running around here. I had to end up going up to Jacksonville. I went to, our doctors, went to their doctor, and obviously it was 2 separate different things.
Mhm.
Or their doctor was saying no, our doctor was saying yes. And then I drove up to Jacksonville. I remember getting up about 3:34 in the morning and drove up there, met with a doctor, and met with him, and he looked over all my stuff, and he decided that we were right, our doctor was right, and sided with us in the case. And that's when we decided to go ahead and we went through with the trial.
Mhm. Yep, yep, and even though we got that favorable EMA opinion and they still took us to trial, right? Because they were arguing that that prior settlement agreement, despite what the EMA said about the medical side of things, they were arguing that that prior settlement agreement encompassed your AFib. So we had to have the judge not only look at the elements of the heart bill and what the EMA said, but we also had to have him interpret that prior settlement agreement. And we went to trial. We went to that live back when they still had an office down in your area in St. Lucie. What do you remember about that day and those proceedings and listening at I'll never forget. We were sitting there, you're sitting to my left, and I'm trying to explain to the judge that these are totally separate conditions. And I was trying to separate my hands as far as I could. And I remember almost smacking you in the chest when I was doing all my rambling. But what do you remember from that day?
It was just like any other trial. You had to present the facts, and we had the facts, they didn't. You did a great job presenting them. The judge ultimately ruled in our favor. I think it was a couple weeks later because they reserved the rule. They don't rule right then in front of you, which is
Right.
like most any civil case. So he ended up ruling in our favor, and that's when I was able to get the proper benefits and care that I was owed by the workers' comp company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let me jump in just for a second, Tater, because we get a lot of we represent a lot of police, a lot of fire all over the state, and this question comes up all the time. People are afraid to file a claim. They're nervous about filing a claim, not just going through the process, but they're worried about the job, right? They're worried about this is going to affect my career. They're going to stick me on midnights, or I'm going to get fired, or some kind of other negative connotation. And so in your case, I mean, you're still working. You never had any problems. Your employer was great to you the entire time. Anytime you had any kind of work restrictions, there was always accommodation. It's important. What the point I want to make, to somebody listening to this is that, we're not dealing with the employer. Filing a claim isn't a fight with your sheriff or your chief or your, whoever. We're dealing with the workers' comp insurance company, right? They're the ones that are trying to jam you up, not your quote unquote job, right? So can you talk a little bit about that and your experience, on the work side while we're dealing with the workers' comp insurance company?
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, I've had a couple different issues. So I've had to deal with it under 2 different administrations. And the first administration was great with everything. The second administration was basically he was the undersheriff under the first administration, so now he's my sheriff now. And when it comes down to how I'm treated at work, they've never treated me differently. They've never, it's always, they call and check on me. They want to make sure I'm good. When I've been, put on issues with light duty with work and stuff, which I'm currently on light duty now. I've been accommodated. I've been able to keep going to work, so I don't just got to sit home and do nothing. So that's nice. But yeah, I know of some people who have been I don't want to say scared. They've been reluctant to file workman's comp claim because they're worried about they don't want to be blackballed. They don't want to be put out of pasture. And We can't do nothing with this guy. And that's not the case. Like you were saying, it's 100% has to do with the insurance company. It has nothing to do with your sheriff or your chief or your fire chief, whether you're on the fire side. That's just the way it is. And like I said, I've had nothing but good experiences with both the administrations I've had to deal with mine. I haven't been blackballed or stuck on midnights. I ended up on midnights because I chose to go to midnights and became a corporal, but that was one thing. But
Right, right.
I put it thing.
Yeah, and I think it's important to stress that, right, is that, there are gonna be some people that have some kind of injuries where they're just not gonna be able to go back to do police work or fire service, and that's a different scenario. But for most cases, especially with like arrhythmias, like on your case, or hypertension, blood pressure, stuff like that, they're gonna go back to work and they're gonna finish their career, whether they're in a municipal pension or whether they're an FRS. They're going to get to go back and finish their career, right? And so, the message that we try to stress is, look, they can't do that to you, So it's nice to hear a real story about somebody really going through this and saying, look, I'm still working, I'm still going to retire, I'm going to finish my career, as well as get the medical care that I need and things like that.
Yeah, and I'll give I plan on, obviously, this year I'm planning on, this is year 26. I'm planning on going on the drop this year, and we'll see what goes from there. I can, obviously I won't bring the guy's name into it, but I know we had one guy with us that was injured on the job, and then ended up, after a couple years of battling and the administration backing him and trying to get it figured out, end up having to do a medical retirement. But it wasn't because the administration forced it. They were actually on top of trying to help. At one point he ended up coming back full duty, and then ended up with another re-injury of the issue, and just wasn't able to fully recover from it, and had some other complications going on. So he ended up having to do what was best for him and his family and take the medical retirement. Not wanting to, but end up, that's where he ended up. That's where his feet landed, and that's what he had to do. But it wasn't because he was pushed out the door by the administration at all. They were backing him 100%, trying to get him better too. So
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're going to get those situations. Somebody's got a really bad injury and they can't do it. I mean, but that's a case by case basis, and again, that's going to be determined by the treatment and, like you said, where their feet land, right, when they get done recovering, right. But that's not because their employer's pushing them out or they're firing them or demoting them or putting them on midnights and making them quit. That's not the.
Yeah, it's more of the exception than the norm. We see more of what like you have, Tater, where they're working with you, they want you to come back, and you're able to come back. It's a very small percentage of people that have that permanent work restriction from their workers' comp doctor and from the injury where they can't go back and they have to look at medical retirement. Majority of people are able to recover and go back and live a normal life, in their personal life, but also work full duty without any issues and keep coming back and, finish out your years of service like you plan, like you're doing.
that's the plan.
Yeah, and something that maybe we can focus on too a little bit, and it's Tater, especially in a case like yours, when you file a claim and it gets denied, that doesn't mean your case is over, right? I mean, the carriers can come up with all kinds of nonsense to deny a claim, and multiple dates of accident too, which we see a lot of, right? I mean, you're kind of like, your case kind of got a little bit of everything, right? Because every time you have a new injury or a new condition, right, that's a brand new claim, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's related to the first one, to the original one, or to an old one. I mean, every time something comes up and you're out, that's a new claim, right? I mean, that gets a little bit confusing sometimes, right? But
So I guess the easy way to kind of give a scenario for that would be I've had the different issues, I've had different claims. Obviously, for the people that have never had to do workers' comp and don't understand it, I guess the easiest explanation would be to use a firefighter. Our hose dragging buddies. They deal with a lot of chemicals. They deal with a lot of smoke. They deal with a lot of things that we don't have to. We still deal with some of it, but they deal with it a heck of a lot more than us. There's firefighters that have had 2, 3, 4 different forms of cancer under the under FRS and under the workman's comp. They're covered, and that would be, so if they end up with 3 different types of cancer and it's all job related, that's 3 different claims. That's 3 different scenarios. And I think that's kind of like the easiest way to explain it.
you're hired. You're hired, Tater. Come on, finish your drop and
Be
you're
on our
hired.
staff.
Come on with us. We're
Yeah,
gonna put you
yeah.
on payroll, man.
16 case.
Yeah,
But
yeah. So you had the reoccurrence from your AFib and had a
last year,
cardioversion last year. So we had a second claim. I mean, I've got clients who have 5 and 6 different dates of accident for the same issue. It's really not an uncommon thing. But after that reoccurrence, we filed the new claim and they were smart enough to accept it this time. But your doctors, you have your cardiologist and then the electrophysiologists that are authorized under the 2016 case came on board on the 2025 and they increased your impairment rating to a pretty significant rating. But that did not mean that you can't keep working, that, you aren't able to do your day-to-day tasks at work. You're not able to do your day-to-day tasks in everyday life, at home with the kids and that sort of stuff. And a lot of people think, just like they're reluctant to file the claims, they think, okay, as part of that, if my impairment is too high, that means I'm not going to be able to go back to work. But Tater, you're the shining example of that not being the case at all.
Yeah, in between the 2016 and last year when we had to or when I went in February for a cardioversion, in between there in 2022 I had an ablation which they also covered then. So I mean I've had some stuff done, and the doctor realized that, looked at everything, and that's when he made the adjustments made the adjustments that he made. And then we just kind of went from there, and then I ended up we'll jump, I guess, into the next one since we're already talking about them. We'll jump into 2025 of June.
June 20.
I ended up back in the hospital with a complete separate issue.
So you got two separate dates of accident and then 2 separate MMIs and 2 separate impairment ratings.
Yeah, for the same condition. And then in June, you were hospitalized for a different heart issue for cardiomyopathy, which they denied that one, making the same arguments as they made originally when we were litigating the 2016, that your cardiomyopathy was part of that prior settlement. And we litigated that literally the morning of the trial. They rolled
February
over.
26th.
Yeah. I mean, we'd done all of our preparations together. We had our prep call together to go over everything.
We tried having mediation with them.
Yep. Yeah.
That went nowhere.
We went to mediation. Yeah. They didn't take your deposition this time, but we had mediation and we did all of our prep, and literally we were ready to go to trial that afternoon. And about 8:30 that morning, I got an email from opposing counsel and they wanted to wave their white flags. Now you've got two dates of accident for the AFib and then cardiomyopathy, 2 separate impairment ratings, like Paolo said, and you're still able to work and everything is being covered. Your procedures at the hospital, they paid for that, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is having you guys represent me. Is, over the years I've had issues where I've been sent bills, I've been sent this, you owe us this money, you owe us that money, and I send it to you guys up there, and I don't hear nothing else about it because it gets taken care of. That's the luxury of having you guys and a good team behind you, and people knowing what they're doing, is you don't have to worry about it.
Well,
I get a bill in the mail, and I don't think I'm supposed to pay it. It's related to that. I send it to you guys, and it's out of my hands.
Well, and that's an important thing too, right? For people that are thinking, well, I'll just deal with it on my own, right?
Mhm.
If you'd made that decision, back in 11 or 12, right? Think about all the procedures that you've had done. Think about all the hospital stays, all the copays, the deductibles, out of pockets for medicine, doctor's appointments, things like that. I mean, I'm sure that that's a big chunk of change that you would have had to pay out of your own pocket.
Well, I had one they tried to get me to pay is $48,000, and that's one example. 48 grand.
Right.
And I told them when they started calling me, and I said, I've sent everything to my attorneys. They'll be contacting you. And they did the right thing. They didn't call me back. They waited till you guys went through what we had to go through, and it was taken care of.
Mm-hmm. Right. But I hear that a lot. They're like, I'll just deal with it on my own. I'll deal with it on my own. But yeah, and unfortunately, this cardiac stuff doesn't typically get better. I mean, the doctors do the best they can to sort of keep it, but you never know what's going to happen. It could get worse. One problem can cause another. And then all of a sudden, over 3 or 4 years, you're in the hospital 3 or 4 times, and then you're paying 3 or 4 different deductibles and 3 or 4 different copays. And it starts adding up. And then you're like, oh, I wish I had I should have drank my V8, and at least reported this earlier. I mean, whether it's us or somebody else, you got to have comp involved, because this stuff can get out of control, especially with the hospital bills. I mean, one bill, $40,000. I mean, that's definitely a lot of money, but I've seen cases with 200,000 or 300,000. Somebody ends up with a bypass. I mean, that is a very expensive surgery.
Yeah.
And then, so, I think the lesson is, get involved early with this stuff, report your claim, get it filed because you never know what's going to happen, especially 2, 3, 5 years down the road. And imagine you didn't file a claim, you didn't get the coverage, right? Would you be able to finish your career? Would you be able to go and do 5 years or more a drop? Maybe not, right? So the benefits are the juice is worth the squeeze, as they say.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and they're
definitely
paying for
100%
everything
of
for
that.
you, right? So you get your
Yep.
office visits covered, your medications are, and all that is as you never get any bills for that stuff. It's all covered, through the
Yeah, and the only thing you get that you have to pay once you've hit MMI is your other doctor is $10. Well,
if they ask you for it. Some of the doctors
yeah,
don't ask for it. I always tell
yeah,
people don't volunteer it.
yeah.
That's the only thing. But your experience with your doctors has been very good overall. I mean, at least from my perspective. Would you agree with that? You've had some good luck with Rankovic and Dr. Goldman?
Yes, when I first started out with workers' comp with the heart stuff, it was Dr. Bradley, then he retired. Then I got Dr. Goldman, and I was dealing with Dr. Rankovic prior.
Mhm.
And then once he came on the workman's comp, he's helping with Dr. Goldman and trying to, keep the old ticker ticking right. And then they're both fantastic doctors. They both I've lucked out, because you hear the horror stories, and we'll get to that part in a second of what you can do about that. But you hear the horror stories about people having horrible doctors. I've lucked out to where mine have been 100% great. They've been advocates for me. They've helped me get through this stuff. I'm 6'6", 300 pounds, but they've held my hand through it all, and I've appreciated it. It's comforting knowing that the doctors you have care for you and truly want to be good for you. And then, but like I said, though, there's horror stories where people have doctors that they just can't get nothing done with. They don't, the doctors don't want to listen to them and this and that. And if you don't have an attorney and you don't research any of this stuff, you don't know that there's actually an option where you could have a one-time switch to a different doctor. And a lot of folks, if they try to handle this stuff on their own, they don't know that. They're just like, oh, I'm screwed. I'm stuck with this doctor. I'll just deal with what he's got to deal with and hope for the best.
Or a lot of times what we see, we get calls from people who had a case and they had a doctor that they didn't like. And instead of hiring a lawyer or trying to figure out what the workaround could be, they just stop going to that doctor and let their statute of limitations run. And then, they're 4 years into retirement and end up needing a bypass surgery. And, then it's on their dime because they let their statute run as opposed to, exploring their options, getting some good legal advice about getting a one-time change and getting to somebody different to keep that case open. They're stuck footing the bill for that surgery, that procedure.
Yeah. So kind of to come full circle and sort of wrap it up, Tater, if you could imagine like you got a bunch of rookies, right, listening to this right now, what is the one best piece of advice you could give the next generation, right, of either police, fire, or corrections guys coming in? They're all 25 years old, they're all strong, they're all fit, right? But what happens after a career's worth of this work? What is some advice, one thing you want them to know?
Number one, at the end of the day, listen to your body. It's going to tell you what works and don't work. But when it comes time to take care of yourself, don't be like we talked earlier on in the podcast here. Don't be afraid to seek the benefits that you're owed. I mean, they're there for a reason. We go out here and obviously everybody when they walk out the door, they don't know if they're coming home. But our careers are that those odds are stacked a little bit higher against us, and just the stress of the things. They say the average regular person deals with 4 or 5, maybe traumatic events in their lifetime, and then you take somebody who's been in law enforcement for 25 years or more, and you're in several hundreds of traumatic events that takes a toll on you. The people fought over the years to get these benefits and these rights in place for us to protect us and take care of us after we, give 25, 30, sometimes 40 years of your life to this place. So, to law enforcement or to being a first responder, firefighter, paramedics. I've been doing this my entire adult life since I was 18. I'm looking forward to the end and enjoying life. So I'm going to do what I can to take care of myself.
Yep. Well, that's a good message, man. I appreciate your time, Tater. Thank you so much. Thank you for being a friend. Thank you for trusting us, and thank you for your service to all of our communities, man. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys for always being there. And like I said, without you guys, I wouldn't have had the care and stuff I've had, or I would have had to pay a lot out of my own pocket, which is good. I didn't have to. So,
Cool, man. All right. Be well, Tater. Thank you.
Thank
all
you.
right, take care.
Thanks for listening to Shielded. At Bickler & Longo, this is what we do. We've represented thousands of first responders across the state of Florida. If you need assistance, don't wait. Please reach out. To learn more, head over to bicklerlaw.com or email us at info@bicklerlaw.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Bickler Law. And if you found today's episode to be helpful, please share it with a fellow first responder who might need to hear it. Until next time, stay safe and thank you for all you do.